Do you believe that even in the most inhospitable settings on Earth, a story of hope can be born? Get ready for a rescue no one could imagine. Imagine the biting cold of an isolated swamp, where the wind whispers icy secrets through the gnarled trees, and each step sinks into the treacherous mud. It is in this hostile environment full of invisible dangers that one of the most moving animal rescue stories you have ever heard unfolds. A true wolf pup in trouble, battling time, relentless nature, and near impossible odds. But before you tell us what happened, stop and think. How far would you go to save an innocent life surrounded by despair? Amidst the thick fog shrouding the Yukon swamp in the heart of Canada's wilderness, something extraordinary was about to happen. The deadly silence of the landscape was broken only by the distant sound of running water and the echo of a life about to be extinguished. It was the silent struggle of a wolf pup, exhausted and cornered, whose eyes reflected not only the fear of imminent death, but the desperate hope of being found. A scenario of extreme danger, where any false move could mean the end. Stories of heartbreaking bear rescues always remind us how fragile the line between life and death is in the wild, and this time, nature seemed merciless. The storm gathering on the horizon threatened to swallow everything in its path, turning the swamp into a death trap. It was as if fate itself was testing the courage of those who dared defy the odds to rescue this wolf pup in trouble. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to face a scenario like this? Feeling the biting cold on your skin, hearing the moans of a defenseless animal asking for help, and knowing that every second counts? This story carries all the elements that make animal rescues unforgettable moments. Adrenaline, compassion, challenge, and above all, the unique connection between humans and wildlife. A connection that goes beyond fear and becomes a pure protective instinct. The images of that moment are heartbreaking. The wolf pup, almost motionless, covered in mud, shivering with cold and weakness, surrounded by murky waters that threatened to drag him away forever. His small breath was a thin thread of hope that still kept him alive, hoping for the unlikely miracle of rescue. But who, in the midst of such desolation, would be able to hear his call? That's exactly where the magic of these rescue stories begins. When everything seems lost, when the strength of the storm seems to want to silence any possibility of survival, that decisive moment appears. The moment when courage overcomes fear. The moment when a human being, guided by the heart, responds to the silent call of nature and decides to act, defying extreme conditions to save an innocent life. This is not just another story about an animal in trouble. This is a story of overcoming that will make you rethink the power of empathy and the importance of each gesture, no matter how small it may seem. Because right now, as you listen to every detail of this unbelievable rescue, a powerful lesson is being revealed. Never underestimate the power of hope, even in the most hostile environment. And what happens next will leave you speechless. What happens next will leave you speechless. The Yukon swamp in remote Canada woke up to an insistent rain, as if the sky itself lamented the harshness of that wild landscape. It was early spring, but the promise of renewal seemed distant in this isolated corner of the world. Heavy clouds dipped the horizon in leaden tones, and a dense fog spread like a silent veil over the flooded expanse. The trees, skeletal and sodden, bowed under the weight of the constant humidity, while the muddy water reflected the gray of the sky, hiding treacherous traps just beneath the murky surface. In this brutal scenario, where each step could be the last, life insists on resisting. There, among the submerged roots and animal trails almost erased by the flood, lives Pamiuq, an Inuit hunter whose story is intertwined with the mysteries of wild nature. Heir to an ancient tradition, he is not just a man who survives, he is part of the very landscape he challenges. Their clothes are handmade, sturdy parkas lined with caribou fur, patiently sewn to withstand the biting winds that sweep across the swamp. The voluminous hood partially covers his face, marked by the cold, but his eyes remain attentive, revealing an almost spiritual intimacy with every detail of that unforgiving world. For Pamiuq, the swamp is not an enemy, but a harsh master. From a young age, he learned to read the signs of the land, the subtle shift of fog that announces a storm, the sudden silence that precedes the movement of predators, the restless dance of birds on the water that reveals the presence of prey or hidden dangers. He carries with him the teachings of the ancients, stories whispered on freezing nights around the campfire, when it was said that every creature has a guardian spirit, and that life in the swamp depends on the fragile balance between respect and courage. As the rain pelts the landscape, Pamiuq advances with calculated steps over the sodden vegetation, the tip of his polished wooden spear guiding the way, not as a weapon, but as an extension of his own perception. The winds howl in his ear like ancient songs of his ancestors, and he listens to them with reverence. There, every sound tells a story, every smell carries a warning. Among the soggy moss and flooded trails, he searches for signs of life or danger. It is in this silent search that something unusual catches his attention. A muffled whisper, a faint moan that is lost among the incessant patter of water drops. Pamiuq stops, his sharp gaze scanning the scenery ahead. It is not the sound of a predator on the prowl, nor the call of a fellow hunter. It's something more delicate, more vulnerable. A cry for help that most would ignore or not even notice. But he, shaped by intimate coexistence with wildlife, knows how to recognize the melody of affliction. With his heart racing, he approaches cautiously, avoiding areas where the mud seems to betray the weight of the unwary. His boots, waterproofed with seal blubber, sink in just enough to leave a subtle mark. The fog closes around him like an icy embrace, but his senses remain sharp. In front of you, partially submerged in the muddy water, is the little wolf pup. His fur, normally thick and protective, is soaked and glued to his trembling body. The eyes, wide with fear and pain, meet Pamiuq's in an instant that seems to suspend time. In that look, all the brutality and beauty of the swamp is condensed. It is the silent call of life that refuses to be extinguished. Pamiuq feels a tightness in his chest, a visceral impulse that transcends any hunter's code. There before him is not prey, but an innocent creature in trouble, a symbol of the fight for survival in a world that rarely offers second chances. He knows the wolf pup won't last long. The rain continues to fall heavily, and the water level slowly rises, threatening to cover even the little bear's last breaths of hope. For a brief moment, memories invade his mind. The legends told by his grandmother, who spoke of four-legged spirits, messengers between men and the invisible forces of nature. When one of them asks for help, it's the land itself that speaks to you, she said with conviction. Pamiuq feels this is one of those moments. The earth is calling, and the answer is in your calloused hands. He looks around, quickly analyzing the conditions. The banks are slippery. The current, although slow, is treacherous. Any carelessness can cost you dearly. But he doesn't hesitate. Your body acts on instinct, driven by a force greater than itself. His feet seek firmness, and his spear becomes support as he advances towards the wolf pup in trouble. Every step is a battle against the sucking mud and biting cold that penetrates to the bone. But he keeps going, because in that moment, saving that life becomes the only mission that matters. If you have been following this story so far, do you feel the weight of this choice? Can you imagine what happens in the heart of a simple man, isolated from the modern world, when he comes across such a fragile being on the verge of death? If this moment has touched you in some way, has awakened the flame of compassion in your chest, take the opportunity to join this journey. Subscribe now on the channel, turn on notifications, and come with me to discover the most surprising outcomes that wild nature has to reveal to us. Because what's about to happen to this wolf pup is going to tug at your heartstrings even more. Pamiuq advanced slowly, each step calculated as if he was following his own destiny, intertwined with that of the small, defenseless being in front of him. The muddy water crept insidiously up his legs, and even with the protection of his rustic boots, he felt the biting coldness of the mud infiltrating him, as if nature itself was testing his courage. The swamp whispered around him. The dense fog closed in like a veil that made everything even more silent, almost unearthly. It was as if the entire world had held its breath to watch what was about to happen. The rain, persistent and freezing, dripped from his caribou fur parka, running down the hood until it mixed with the ambient humidity. making it difficult to distinguish between sweat and ice water. But Pamiuq did not waver. Something inside him pulsed stronger than fear, stronger than the cold. It was as if that lonely wolf pup had been calling to him since the beginning of his journey. The faint moans he had heard before, muffled by the constant sound of water drops, now became clearer, penetrating deep into his soul like laments of a life on the verge of collapse. He squinted through the fog, searching for the source of the sound, until he finally saw it. There, in front, almost camouflaged by the mud and damp vegetation, a wolf pup, soaked and trembling, struggled with increasingly fragile strength. Its fur, which perhaps in other times was lush and protective, was now completely stuck to its body by the thick mud, revealing its fragility. The small paws tried futilely to free themselves from the treacherous mudbank that held him trapped as if they were invisible claws of the earth itself. His eyes, huge and desperate, met Pamiuq's in a silent, profound appeal that required no translation. In that instant, time seemed to stretch. Pamiuq saw in the wolf pup's eyes not only the fear of imminent death, but also the purest expression of hope. A raw hope, like wildlife itself that insists on resisting even in the most brutal scenarios. The wolf pup was separated from the pack, and that for a wolf meant an almost certain sentence. Alone, exhausted, without the protection of those close to him, it was only a matter of time before the storm did its final work. The tremor that ran through the small body was a mixture of unbearable cold and pure terror. With each attempt to move, the mud pulled him further down, as if it wanted to swallow him into the dark depths of that unforgiving swamp. To an inattentive viewer, it might seem like just another natural scene, an inevitable cycle of wildlife. But for Pamiuq, raised to understand and respect every detail of nature's delicate balance, it was a calling. Not just a call from the wolf pup, but from the very essence of the forest, the swamp, of life in its most vulnerable form. He knew that, at that moment, he was that little being's only chance of salvation. Taking a deep breath, Pamiuq remembered the wise words of his grandfather, who always said that, "In the land of spirits we are all responsible for each other, even for those who cannot ask for help in words." And there, in front of that wolf pup in trouble, this teaching came to life. His heart pounded in his chest, not with fear but with determination. Every fiber of his being was connected to the destiny of that little wolf, as if they were both threads of the same tapestry woven by the spirits of the forest. He watched with increased attention. The wolf pup tried to keep its nose out of the water, but with each false move it sank a little deeper. His thin paws slipped, struggling futilely against the force of the mud that pulled him down like a silent predator. The animal's eyes, glassy and moist, conveyed a message that crossed any species barrier. A cry for help, a desperate cry for life. Pamiuq knew there was no time to waste. The rain, which until then had seemed constant, now turned into an even heavier curtain, obscuring his vision and dangerously raising the water level around the wolf pup. The muddy current began to form, carrying branches and debris that crashed into the small, defenseless body, threatening to push it into even deeper and more treacherous areas. It was a silent race against nature's clock, and every second that passed seemed like an eternity. The scene was heartbreaking. The weakened wolf pup abandoned its attempts to fight to just breathe, panting with effort while its head shook, heavy with exhaustion. Pamiuq, with his muscles tense and his eyes fixed on the desperate scene, felt an almost instinctive impulse to act. He knew that this moment required more than just courage. It required total surrender, a willingness to put one's own safety at risk to attempt something that many would consider a lost cause. And you, who are following every detail of this exciting story, this true battle for survival, can you feel the weight of this responsibility? Can you imagine for a moment, faced with this dilemma between watching the tragedy happen or becoming the only hope for an innocent life? This is the kind of story that moves hearts, that reminds us of the importance of compassion, even in the most inhospitable and extreme environments of the wild. And if up until now you felt connected to this rescue mission, you felt your heart accelerate along with Pamiuq's, take the opportunity to strengthen this connection with our channel. Subscribe now and stay with us. Because what comes next in this incredible rescue story will stir your emotions even more. Pamiuq remained motionless for a brief moment that seemed to last for an eternity. The weight of the decision he needed to make was not small. He had grown up learning that, in the vastness of wild nature, each creature had its role, its journey of survival traced by forces that often escaped human understanding. The ancients said that to interfere too much was to upset the delicate balance of life, that saving a hungry predator or a vulnerable wolf pup could trigger unpredictable consequences in the great tapestry of the natural world. But how can you ignore that pleading look? How can you simply turn your back on a life that, without your help, was clearly on the verge of ending? The old hunter's heart pounded in his chest. It was as if it tried to scream louder than the relentless rain surrounding him. With every second that passed, the little wolf's paws sank a little deeper into the sticky mud. His eyes, once alive and full of wild instinct, now sparkled with a dim glow, almost as if they were already saying goodbye to the world. There was a screaming silence in that scene of natural chaos, a silence echoing inside Pamiuq, resonating like a question he couldn't get out of his mind. To intervene or not to intervene. He knew that, in the relentless hierarchy of wildlife, the wolf, even a pup, was a symbol of strength, of claw, of pure resilience. Wolves are born survivors, efficient hunters, adaptable to the most extreme conditions. However, that wolf pup was alone. There was no sign of the pack. There were no mothers or brothers around to guide him, protect him, or teach him the tortuous ways of swamp survival. It was just him, Pamiuq, and the trembling little being at the mercy of a nature that, although majestic, also knew how to be implacably cruel. Memories of past hunts scrambled in Pamiuq's mind. He remembered watching wolves from a distance, admiring the way they worked as a team, how they were able to overcome the toughest adversity. But that wolf pup, lost and fragile, had no team, no plan, no strength, just hope. A silent hope that, in some inexplicable way, had crossed the barrier between species and deeply touched the spirit of the hunter. Pamiuq took a deep breath, smelling the strong, earthy scent of the swamp, mixed with the scent of rain and fear emanating from the little wolf. If I interfere, will I be disrespecting the codes of nature? He thought. Or am I fulfilling a greater role, an act of compassion that transcends the rules of the jungle? The doubt was heavy, like a shadow that lay across his consciousness. He knew there would be no witnesses to judge him, no elders to reprimand him, no forest spirits to come and demand explanations. The choice was his and his alone. As he pondered, a stronger gust of wind tore through the mist, violently shaking the skinny trees around. A sharp crack echoed as a heavy branch fell next to the wolf pup, spraying mud in all directions and causing the small body to shake even more in terror. It was as if the forest itself was testing his hesitation, sending a cruel reminder that time was running out. Pamiuq felt a shiver run down his spine, but it wasn't just the cold of the environment. It was the overwhelming weight of responsibility that fell on him. Intervene or not? The question pounded in his mind with the insistence of a war drum. On one side of the scale, the lifelong teachings of absolute respect for natural laws. On the other, the urgent call of a heart that at that moment saw neither predator nor prey, but only a soul in suffering. The compassion he felt was not the result of reason. It was something deeper, almost instinctive, as if a greater force was driving him not to allow that story to end there, buried in the mud with no chance of redemption. His gaze swept the scene again, searching for any sign of the pack, any movement in the dense fog that indicated that help might be on the way. But there was nothing. No distant howling, no rustling in the bushes to betray the presence of other wolves. Only silence and the almost inaudible cry of the wolf pup, who now seemed to resignedly accept his dark fate. It was a scene that would tug at the heart of anyone with a love for wildlife, an image that would forever be etched in the memory of anyone who witnessed it. It was then that, as if a veil had been lifted from his vision, Pamiuq saw the situation with complete clarity. He understood that, more than a simple momentary decision, this was a test of his own destiny, a test that nature imposed on him to measure the extent of his humanity. It was as if the entire universe was conspiring to place him at that moral crossroads, forcing him to choose between comfortable apathy and courageous action. And you who are following this breathtaking story, have you ever wondered what you would do in Pamiuq's place? Would you have the courage to defy the unwritten laws of the forest in the name of an act of pure compassion? If this narrative has touched your emotions so far, if it has awakened the flame of empathy in you, be sure to further strengthen your connection with these real and inspiring stories of survival and overcoming in wild nature. Subscribe to the channel now and stay with us, because the outcome of this story promises even more intense moments, capable of touching your heart deeply. With no more room for doubt or hesitation, Pamiuq felt the weight of the moment transform into pure action. The decision was made. There was no going back. His eyes, hardened by years of facing the wildest nature's most brutal adversities, were now fixed on the wolf pup's small, trembling body. The rain pelted his face like cold needles, but he barely noticed. All his focus, all his vital energy, was channeled into that urgent animal rescue mission. It was a story of survival that was unfolding before his eyes, and he would not allow it to end in tragedy. With precise movements, worthy of an experienced hunter who knows every secret of the swamp, he removed from his back the cordage that he always carried, rolled up in his tanned leather backpack. That wasn't just any equipment. It was an old hand-braided cord, his own, taught by his grandfather in the silent winter days when the lessons of survival were passed down like living relics. Quickly tying one end to his waist, he threw the remainder of the rope around one of the bare-rooted trees near the mud bank, creating a safety line that could mean the difference between life and death, not only for the wolf pup, but for him as well. The terrain was treacherous. Every step taken towards the wolf pup felt like a test of the earth itself, which sucked greedily at his heavy boots, as if it wanted to trap him there forever. He felt the ground give way beneath his feet, and the muddy water threatened to rise quickly, wrapping around his legs to the knee, then to his thighs. But he didn't back down. I was prepared for the risks. He knew that the swamp was merciless to those who faltered, and so he advanced with calculated calm, distributing his body weight masterfully, sticking the tip of his spear firmly into the unstable ground to maintain balance. As he got closer to the wolf pup, the tension increased. Every movement, every breath held was a game of strategy between man and nature. The wolf pup, with his eyes wide open and breathing heavily, could barely struggle. His energy was visibly draining away, as if hope itself was running out in the relentless mud. But when the little animal's eyes met Pamiuq's again, something changed. There was a spark there, an almost invisible glow that said, "Don't give up on me." And Pamiuq wouldn't give up. He knew the risk of sinking was real and deadly. Each sudden movement could open the mud trap's mouth even wider, swallowing them both without warning. Therefore, he carefully studied each section of the terrain, looking for firmer points, for hidden roots that could support his weight. It used its spear not only for support but to probe the depth of the mud ahead, mentally mapping out a safe route to the wolf pup in trouble. His heart was beating fast, not with fear but with urgency. Time was his biggest enemy. The muddy water now lapped at the wolf pup's chin, and every second of delay was a cruel threat to its fragile existence. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Pamiuq reached out a gloved hand toward the little wolf. But the range was short. The wolf pup was just beyond where his hand could safely reach. Using a trick learned on glacier rescue expeditions, he took one of the free ends of the rope, carefully tied it to the wooden spear, and with one precise movement, slid the tool toward the pup, offering it an opportunity to latch on. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The wolf pup instinctively tried to steady one of his front paws on the spear, but the slippery mud made him almost lose it. Pamiuq, with a dexterity worthy of the most legendary hunters in the stories he heard in his childhood, gently pulled, encouraging the little one to trust in that unlikely help. "Strength, little one, strength," he whispered, almost as if his words could transfer vital energy to the wolf. And as if understanding the urgency of the moment, the wolf pup summoned the last bit of strength that remained in his exhausted body and dug his weakened claws into the rough wood. With extreme caution, inch by inch, Pamiuq began to pull. The mud resisted, as if it didn't want to release its prey, but it was more stubborn than the swamp. Using the weight of his body against the suction force of the earth, he retreated with painful slowness, never rushing his movements, as he knew that a false pull could tear the wolf pup's fragile body or break the improvised lever. Sweat ran down his face, mixing with the rainwater while the muscles in his arms burned under the continued effort. And then, finally, with one last determined tug, the wolf pup broke free of the sticky trap and was pulled to the safety of Pamiuq's arms. The small body shook uncontrollably. The breath came in short gasps, but there was still life there, pulsing stubbornly, defying the fate that had almost been sealed. Pamiuq hugged the wolf pup to his chest, feeling the fragile warmth beneath the thick layer of his hunting clothes. A flame of hope lit up inside him. And you who are here, following every detail of this incredible animal rescue story, can you imagine the tension of this moment? Can you feel the mixture of fear and determination that Pamiuq experienced in that decisive moment? If this story has touched your emotions, if it has touched your heart in any way, write it now in the comments the word strength. This will show that you, like Pamiuq, believe in the resilience of wildlife, even in the most extreme scenarios. And stay with me, because what comes next in this exciting story will surprise you even more. Pamiuq felt the little wolf's body tremble against his chest, as if every tremor of the wolf pup reverberated directly in his heart. The heat emanating from the fragile creature was almost imperceptible, a heat that fought bravely not to be extinguished in the face of the icy fury of the hostile environment. But at that moment, a new element imposed itself on the already tension-filled scene. The wind, which until then had been blowing with a constant wail, increased in intensity, gaining a frightening force that made the branches snap and the treetops bend as if they were made of paper. Above them, the sky seemed to collapse into dense layers of dark clouds which gathered ominously. The rain, which was already relentless, turned into a heavy curtain of thick drops, lashing the skin, further soaking the already saturated ground with water. Pamiuq knew those signs like few others. They were the harbingers of a violent storm, one that gave no respite, that punished the land with furious winds and sudden floods, capable of transforming a relatively safe path into a field of deadly traps. He knew that every second now was crucial. The little wolf was safe from the mud, but still extremely vulnerable. Exposed to the bitter cold and merciless rain, his drenched body shook uncontrollably, as if fighting to keep the last spark of life alive. There was something in the wolf pup's eyes, a mixture of fear and gratitude that touched the hunter's soul. It was as if, in that silence between the rumblings of one thunder and another, an invisible bond was born between them, a connection that transcended species, instincts, that spoke directly from the heart of one being to another. Without wasting time, Pamiuq placed the wolf pup against his chest, protecting it with his own body, trying to block the biting wind and rain that seemed to want to reach even the most hidden corner of his improvised shelter. He knew he needed to act quickly. His steps, still firm despite the soggy ground, made his way through the vegetation weighed down by the water. Every move was calculated, every decision, a battle between urgency and the risk of fatal accidents. In the back of his mind, the memory of an old wooden cabin built by local hunters lit a spark of hope. It wasn't a perfect shelter, but it offered minimal protection from the worst of the approaching storm. That was where he needed to take the wolf pup, no matter what. Feeling the weight of responsibility, Pamiuq advanced, his eyes attentive to every detail around him. The sound of thunder rumbled so close that it made the small body in his arms shudder with fear. Instinctively, he squeezed the wolf pup tighter, as if he wanted to convey security through his own touch. The water, previously confined to the saturated soil, now began to form treacherous floods that ran down the natural slopes of the land, transforming the path into a web of traps. But Pamiuq did not waver. His years of living in the jungle taught him to read the signs of the land as if they were words written on ancient parchment. He avoided the most dangerous sections, used the exposed roots as natural steps, and held the wolf pup close to his chest, warming him not just with his body heat, but with the internal flame of his own determination. The bond between man and animal grew stronger with each step. There were no words exchanged between them, but each gesture of care, each look of concern, told a silent story of deep empathy. When he felt that the pup was shivering almost convulsively from the cold, Pamiuq stopped under the densest canopy of a tree, momentarily protecting himself from the flood, and with deft hands, extracted a piece of dried caribou skin from his hunting bag. He wrapped the wolf pup in that warm, insulating material, as he would with one of his own wolf pups, if he had them. It still wasn't enough. He knew that the wolf pup needed food and energy to keep its body functioning in the face of such adversity. Searching through his bag once more, he found small pieces of dried fish, which he always took with him on expeditions. Carefully, he brought the food to the wolf pup's mouth. At first, the little one didn't react. I was exhausted, almost surrendered. But then, perhaps driven by a last survival instinct, it opened its jaw slightly and with difficulty bit the fish. It was a weak signal, but a sign of life, of struggle, of the will to survive. Pamiuq felt his heart warm inside. Feeding that wolf pup in trouble was more than a simple act of help. It was a powerful reminder that wildlife, as strong as it may seem, also carries within it a heartbreaking fragility. He knew he couldn't stop. Holding the wolf pup firmly, he better protected the creature's head against his chest and accelerated his pace towards the improvised shelter, fighting against the force of nature that seemed to want to test every last limit of his resistance. And you who are here living every second of this story alongside me, did you feel the tension of this moment? Did you feel the connection born between man and animal in the face of the most brutal adversity? If this narrative touched your heart, let us know in the comments the word resistance. I want to see who here, like Pamiuq and this little wolf, believes in the strength of resisting, of fighting until the last moment, even when everything seems lost. And stay with me, because what's to come in this exciting animal rescue story will elevate the emotions of this incredible journey even further. The makeshift shelter finally appeared before Pamiuq's tired eyes, like a beacon of hope amid the chaos of the storm. The old wooden cabin, abandoned by local hunters for years, stood firm despite the weather and the fury of the elements. Its weathered, moisture-blackened boards told silent stories of battles fought against relentless winds and biting blizzards. Now, it would have a new purpose, to be the momentary sanctuary where life, about to go out, could rekindle its flame. Pamiuq pushed the door with his shoulder, listening to the tired creak of the hinges as he entered the dark, damp interior of the shelter. The wood gave off the strong, musty smell mixed with the musk of a sodden forest. But at that moment, it seemed like the safest place in the world. Gently, he placed the little wolf on a makeshift bed of fur and dry moss that luckily still remained there, protected from moisture by the narrow gaps in the aged structure. The wolf pup was exhausted, each breath a Herculean effort, but his eyes, oh his eyes, still carried that stubborn spark of life. It was then that, amidst the silence broken only by the insistent patter of rain on the precarious roof, something extraordinary happened. The wolf pup's gaze, previously glazed with fear, pain, and cold, slowly began to change. Pamiuq, who had seen countless wild looks in his long hunting life, immediately recognized that subtle but profoundly powerful transformation. It was as if, at that moment, the little wolf began to see beyond the natural threat that humans usually represented. The almond-shaped eyes, which reflected the raw terror of imminent death, began to soften, to lose that shine of pure despair. They gained depth, as if sinking into a silent understanding of what was happening. It was a silent exchange, full of meaning, impossible to describe in simple words. But if Pamiuq tried to put into words what he felt when he looked at those dilated pupils, he might say, it was as if those eyes were shouting, "Thank you," even without words. The connection that was formed there was not the result of chance. It was the direct consequence of every gesture of care, of every gentle touch, of every decision made with an open heart and a soul in harmony with wild nature. Pamiuq felt, almost like a whisper in the depths of his consciousness, that this moment was bigger than him, bigger than the storm, bigger than the very swamp that surrounded them. It was the silent miracle of life being celebrated in its purest state. To help the little one's recovery, Pamiuq carefully began to dry the wolf pup's soaked fur with pieces of fabric that he carried in his travel bag, using slow, rhythmic movements, as if he was afraid of scaring the little creature with sudden gestures. As heat began to build up in the wolf's body, he wrapped it further in the dry fur available, creating a protective nest that recalled the comfort of maternal touch that the wolf pup had lost. Every tremor that passed through the little wolf's body was a painful reminder of the battle he had fought against death outside. But there was also now a slight relaxation, a cautious abandonment to the unexpected safety of that shelter and that man. Pamiuq took some more of the dried fish, carefully shredding it to make it easier to chew. He brought the pieces to the wolf's nose, which, after a few hesitant attempts, began to chew more vigorously, eating as if it were finally beginning to accept that the fight for survival was worth it. Pamiuq watched silently, respectfully, as if witnessing a sacred ritual. The wetness in the wolf pup's eyes was no longer just a reflection of the storm or the pain, but a living response to the warm presence of the one who had, against all odds, chosen to intervene. It was an invisible but intense exchange of trust being built with the same solidity with which the deepest roots support trees in the face of the greatest storms. While the storm raged outside, throwing gusts of wind against the fragile walls of the cabin, inside the shelter, a diametrically opposite scenario emerged, a small oasis of hope and connection between normally distant worlds. Pamiuq, accustomed to seeing wildlife only from afar, now shared his own breath with a creature that would once have been just part of the landscape. He could feel life pulsing back to the wolf pup in trouble, as if the heat emanating from his body was enough to rekindle the almost extinguished flames of that young existence. And as he stood there, watching over the wolf pup like a silent guardian, he was struck by an almost ancestral certainty. Something deep had been sealed between them. Something that transcended logic. Something that only direct experience with the secrets of the forest could teach. There, in the most intimate of silences, a bond was born that would never be broken. And you, who are immersed in this story as intense as wildlife itself, can you feel this invisible connection? Can you imagine what it means, in a scenario of total desolation, for two beings from different worlds to come together through the simple and powerful will to live? If this story has touched your heart so far, I invite you to let us know comments the word connection. I want to see who feels here, just like Pamiuq and the little wolf, this connection that transcends any barrier. And stay with me, because what's to come will stir your emotions much more. The storm was beginning to show signs of weakening, but the sky remained heavy, as if the universe itself was still hesitant to restore calm to the world. The sound of rain on the leaves gradually withered, replaced by a dense silence, charged with electricity and expectation. Pamiuq, still kneeling next to the wolf pup wrapped in dry fur, felt the air filled with something indescribable. It wasn't just the persistent humidity or the cold that insisted on penetrating to the bones. It was something beyond visible nature, something instinctive that ran like an ancient whisper through his veins. The little wolf breathed more steadily now, its fragile sides rising and falling in a rhythm that spoke of struggle, of stubborn survival against all odds. But suddenly, something in the environment changed. It was almost imperceptible, but for someone like Pamiuq, who knew how to hear the secrets of the forest, it was impossible to ignore. A deeper silence fell over the forest, as if even the wind was holding its breath. The birds, which had previously timidly resumed their songs after the storm, fell silent at once, as if they were aware of the approach of something much larger. It was at that moment that he heard it. First, just a snap of a branch in the distance, then another, closer, until the sound became the unmistakable sound of heavy paws stepping on the wet ground, advancing cautiously. Pamiuq's eyes narrowed, his heart quickened. He knew, without a doubt, what that meant. The pack had returned. Outside, among the trees deformed by the force of the storm, silhouettes began to emerge from the dissipating fog. Adult wolves, imposing and alert, appeared one by one like living shadows, their eyes shining like lanterns against the gray darkness of the swamp. It was a spectacle as beautiful as it was intimidating, a true encounter between worlds that rarely coexist in peace. Pamiuq, maintaining the calm of a man who had already faced many dangers in nature, felt his body instinctively stiffen, preparing for what would come next. There he was, inside a precarious shelter, unarmed with a wolf pup from his own pack in his arms, and now surrounded by the members of the pack who watched him in piercing silence. And it was then that his eyes met the eyes of the pack leader. It was an imposing wolf, with thick fur marked by scars that silently narrated the story of countless battles for survival. His eyes, yellow and piercing like the sun filtered through fog, fixed on Pamiuq's with an almost supernatural intensity. That look wasn't pure savagery nor immediate aggression. There was something deeper there. It was as if, deep down in his wildest instinct, the boss wolf recognized, even without fully understanding what had happened. What followed was an instant of pure magic, a moment that defied logical explanation. The tension of the scene was palpable, as if every molecule of air was saturated with unpredictable possibilities. What will happen now? You must be asking yourself, just as Pamiuq was asking himself, every fiber of his being on alert, every beat of his heart resounding like a drum in the silence that surrounded them. But against all expectations, the pack leader did not advance. He didn't growl, he didn't threaten. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on Pamiuq, as if searching for answers that words could not provide. An almost imperceptible gesture, he slightly tilted his head to the side, his eyes firm but curious, evaluating this human who, instead of capturing or killing, had chosen to save one of his own. Pamiuq felt a wave of silent respect pass between them, a mutual recognition of strength and compassion. There was no shared language, no promise of peace, but there was understanding. A raw, primitive, and at the same time powerful understanding, which only those who truly live and respect the laws of nature are capable of experiencing. He didn't dare move suddenly. He just kept the wolf pup close to his chest, as if he wanted to show that there was no threat in his presence, just care and protection. The wolf pup, feeling the moment charged with energy, opened its eyes and, with effort, let out a small whine, weak but full of life. That sound, so simple but so full of meaning, seemed to be the key to releasing the tension. The wolves, almost in unison, tilted their heads slightly, as if recognizing the call. The leader stepped forward, looked one last time into Pamiuq's eyes, and then, as if in silent respect, turned and disappeared again into the mist that slowly rose from the sodden ground. One by one, the other members of the pack followed, disappearing like specters into the shadows of the forest. The silence that followed was deafening, full of raw and uncontained emotions. Pamiuq's breathing came in waves, not from physical exhaustion, but from the impact of what he had just witnessed. There was something profoundly transformative about that silent exchange, something that would forever be etched not just in his memory, but in those of all of us who now share this story of connection, respect, and pure survival in the wild. And if you felt the intensity of this moment, if you managed to transport yourself inside this improvised hut, breathe together with Pamiuq and witness this meeting between man and pack, I ask you, leave your like right now in this video. Not only does this help spread this incredible story, it also shows that you value every gesture of courage and respect for wildlife. And stay with me, because what comes next on this exciting journey will surprise you even more. The weight of the storm was beginning to dissipate, as if the forest itself had decided to grant a brief moment of respite after the scene he had just witnessed. The clouds, still dense, moved slowly across the sky, allowing slits of pale light to penetrate the gray blanket and touch the sodden ground. This soft light invaded the precarious hut where Pamiuq still knelt, feeling the pulse of life of the little wolf warm against his chest. It was as if even the universe silently, was recognizing the enormous effort that had been made there, against all odds. Outside, a subtle movement caught his attention. The silhouettes of the pack, which had disappeared shortly before in the mists of the forest, began to emerge again, but this time without the tension of before. It was as if, in that brief separation, something had been understood in the collective depths of the wolves. Pamiuq stood his ground, showing no threat, respecting every beat of the savage heart that approached. What he felt was not fear, but rather a deep respect for that family of survivors who, like him, fought daily against the relentless forces of nature. The pack leader was the first to advance, his eyes, marked by the wisdom of countless battles, fixed once again on Pamiuq's. There was no arrogance, no aggressiveness. There was something deeper, almost reverent. A silent recognition of what words could never express. Without rushing, the large wolf approached, stopping a few steps away from the man and the wolf pup. For a brief moment, the two worlds remained like this, the human and the wild, connected by an invisible thread of mutual respect. Pamiuq, sensing the right time, leaned forward slightly and with extreme delicacy, placed the wolf pup on the mossy floor of the hut, still wrapped in the furs that had warmed its weakened body. The little wolf, feeling the proximity of his own, let out a weak but emotionally charged whine, as if calling his blood brothers back closer. It was a sound that seemed to echo beyond the walls of the cabin, reverberating in the very essence of the forest. Immediately, a female from the pack, probably the wolf pup's mother, came forward with restrained haste, her eyes wide with anxiety and protective instinct. She smelled the little wolf's body, recognizing him without any doubt, and then licked his head vigorously, cleaning the marks of mud and fear that still remained stuck to his fur. Other members of the pack also approached, forming a circle around the wolf pup, smelling it, touching it with their wet noses, as if they were silently celebrating the return of the one that had almost been considered lost. Pamiuq watched the scene with teary eyes, but his expression was serene, filled with an emotion so deep that it seemed to merge with the environment itself. There, in that unique moment, he was no longer just a hunter. He was a vital link in the chain of life, a stranger who, guided by compassion, had become part of the story of this wild family. And how beautiful it was to see life take its natural course, when man was not an intruder, but a silent guardian. The drops of water that ran down the hut's improvised roof now seemed to be singing a soft symphony, accompanying the pack's gestures of affection. It was a silent dance between return and acceptance, between danger overcome and the silent celebration of survival. The wolf pup, although still weak, reciprocated with small movements of its tail, as if it recognized the familiar faces and took comfort in the safety of the protective circle formed around it. Pamiuq knew that soon, his presence there would no longer be necessary. Nature has its own time, its own rules, and he will always respect that flow. But before leaving, before letting the pack completely reintegrate into its habitat without human witnesses, he allowed himself one last thought that pulsed strongly in his mind, as if it echoed through the trees, the winds, and the waters of the swamp. Sometimes a stranger's compassion is the only bridge between life and death. That phrase sounded inside him with absolute clarity, like an ancient truth that had always been there, but was only now being revealed with all its force. Compassion does not require explanations. It does not require reward. It simply exists, pulsates within us, guiding our steps when reason falters and instinct calls for action. And you, who followed every second of this exciting animal rescue journey, did you feel the strength of this moment? Can you see how, even in the wildest and most unforgiving scenarios of nature, a simple gesture of empathy can completely change the fate of an innocent life? If this story touched your heart as it did Pamiuq's, I invite you now to leave your like in this video. Not just in support of our work to tell these incredible stories of survival in the wild, but as a symbol that you too believe in the transformative power of compassion. And stay with me, because the journey is not over yet. What's to come carries even deeper emotions, and I guarantee you won't want to miss it. If this story moved you as much as it did me, and you believe in the power of compassion in wild nature, take advantage now and get involved. subscribe on the channel. Here you will always find real and exciting stories of animal rescues in extreme situations, which will surprise you from beginning to end. Oh, and enjoy too. Let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. I love knowing where these incredible stories are going. It will be incredible to see this map of hearts connected by nature. And don't go away, because the next video that is already appearing here on the screen will give you goosebumps. It's an even more impressive story of survival and courage, where a wolf pup faces the most unexpected danger in the forest. Click now to continue this exciting journey with us. You won't believe what happens at the end.